Welcome to PEP 4. This is your capstone task PEP, one you might have heard about with the GTPA. So I just want to give a quick little overview of what we're doing before we dive into detail. So this is our Moodle page, and it's a MTeach and BEd PEP 4 common, and it's got the normal areas here. The first thing to notice, it's 8 weeks in duration, and then you go on PEP, and we come back for some workshops to assist you with your preparation of your assessment task, particularly the GTPA. So it's quite an intensive one, and therefore I encourage you to prioritise this. This is something that I think is best learnt if you're actively involved on campus, if you have that opportunity, or online. But relying on just recordings will set you back significantly, because this is the capstone and the largest task that you'll do in your respective BEd and MTeach courses. So let's have a look at a few key framing concepts and that you might come across, which will assist you in understanding what. Well, in the module that will have a weekly schedule, and although it might vary because this is a 9-week one from previous semester, we will have GTPA foci throughout. So we'll do some teaching and learning, and then we'll have some workshops which focuses on the GTPA, and those things are connected. So that's our schedule. You go on break and then you do a 5-week PEP. Interesting, and we'll come across it again, that you have 2 parts to your assessment, one being the folio and one being the GTPA, but there's an additional assessment. The assessment, which you must pass all of them, although section task number 1 is formative, but it's what we call a threshold task. What does that mean? That means you have to have done it to be allowed to go on to PEP, because it is designed as a scaffold and a core concept of the skills, the analysis, the evidentiary requirements that you will have to do in a larger form than the GTPA is mirrored in part to assessment task number 1, where we're going to do a learner case study and data-informed analysis. Your GTPA is a full-blown data-informed analysis. On PEP, you're doing your normal placement. You'll have your folio, which has a reduced load in your folio. We're not asking you to submit all these lessons and so on. Those lessons, you'll have integration of some lessons and planning documents in your GTPA, so we're not asking you to do it twice. And that's due 1 week after your PEP. So if your PEP's extended through school events or you've had sickness, then you do it 1 week after. And the PEP is finished, and the GTPA is due 2 weeks after. Now, there's no grace period. The GTPA is a nationally accredited assessment tool, which we are collectively looking at with 19 universities, and the conditions cannot be amended to suit CHC. They are standard conditions. That is 2 weeks post-PEP. You have to have it submitted, no grace period. And it's a 5,000 word report. Not so much appendices in this instance, but embedments, and you have to take a differentiated teaching or data-informed teaching practice, and you have 3 focus or marker students in that. Now, it's a pass-fail like most PEPs in terms of your assessment. It's an ungraded pass. Now, I'm going to introduce a couple of frameworks which will guide our learning and also relate to our assessment. The first one is, this unit is what I call a data-informed teaching practice unit. In the previous PEPs, you've learned in PEP 1 how to write lessons and lesson sequences. In PEP 2, you talked about how can I manage and organise my classroom and behaviour management, and also logistics and so on. In PEP 3, you looked at unit planning, a sequence of learning, how you might construct those things together. Well, this one says you now know how to teach. And it's about now, how can I collect information and understanding of the students before me, that is, know my students, and therefore that is my data, which informs how I teach. So it is saying, not just I am teaching the same to everyone, it's actually how am I teaching differently, informed by the students before me in terms of a range of things. Now, the GTPA assessment is what I call an analytical report. It has a number of sections which we'll quickly touch on now, but go through extensively as part of the modules and course, where it is data informed as well. In other words, we collect data and we make teaching and learning decisions, planning and learning decisions based on that, and therefore we then assess how did the students go. Well, this model that I'm using is how do I collect data, I pre-assess, I reflect and analyze, I then plan, teach, and do some sort of formative assessment along the way, and that whole cycle, if I look at it, we have summative assessment at the end. So we'll be breaking up our lecture series with these things in mind as a guiding framing tool. And the other framework was what I call the domains. Now, data-informed practice is a cousin of differentiated teaching practice. In other words, how do I teach with the students in mind? And there's two sides to this, and this is how we'll also frame some of our teaching and learning material. That we will look at the student and obtain data, whether that's quantitative or qualitative data, on the student's readiness to learn. What's their capacity? Where are they at this point in time? Where are their gaps? Where are their strengths in terms of an academic sense on your particular subject area that you're going to do your practice in? What are getting to know your students? What are their passions? What drives them? What are their special interests? And then the learning profile is probably understood as saying, how I learn best. What things can you do as a teacher can I learn best? And there's probably two major areas in here. One is what I call TAPS, total class together, alone, independent learner, pair share, group work, small groups, and so on. So do they work in those situations better? What modality sort of resonates with their students across this learning area in terms of visual, auditory, kinesthetic, or reading? So how does this student work best? Is what we describe as their learning profile. So understanding those students, then, okay, how I then teach right-hand column. How do I select my content differently for levels? How do I select my content which relates to different interests and passion? Do I give choice here? How do I select my content in terms of how I'm presenting it? Is it going to be, videos and other things, or is it just going to be written material? Now, processes talk about the range of teaching strategies and the organisation of your classroom. Product relates to how you're going to assess and what things would be acceptable. Assessment, in a sense, demonstrations of the student's learning. And the last one is is the learning environment. What you have in your class, what's a cultural, physical, and educationally. So we're going to frame our learning around those two things. That's the cycle of teaching and learning. And this is some of the framing areas we're going to be looking at to how we can actually produce teaching strategies that are different, or variety of teaching strategies that meet learner need. And that's comes from the left-hand side, data, and the right-hand side in response. Moving on now to our GTPA, which is the assessment of this. Well, the GTPA has 5 sections that you need, and it's planning, teaching, assessing, reflecting, and appraising. Now, that's the criteria sheet, and you have to meet all of these, met or not met. Met or not met. So it's not graded HD through to pass or fail, but you have to achieve 4 met out of the 5 to pass this unit. And it gives, here are all the key criteria that we are looking at. This booklet here is the GTPA booklet, and what it does is goes through and unpacks all the material that is required in you to do in each assessment. So if I choose one of these, practice number 2, it says there's a repeat of its criteria. This is what I need to do. This is what I need to submit. And are there any embedded evidence or mandatory elements that I have to put into my report? So that booklet outlines that, and we'll go through that booklet and each of those learning phases in the GTPA session. So back to how we link a couple of these things together. You notice in the teaching cycle, we started with data, we analysed, we planned, and we taught, and then we assessed how we are going along the way, formative, or if at the end of the unit, summative assessment. Well, this very much is what I call the meta-narrative of data-informed practice, and the meta-narrative which is reflected in the areas and the criteria of the GTPA. The first one is called data and planning. So GTPA section number 1 here spans this area here. Section number 2 is about I plan and therefore I teach, and it spans these two elements. And the assessment number 3 is about how do I assess along the way and how do I assess summatively at the end. Section number 4 asks you to reflect upon your data, reflect upon your planning, reflect upon your teaching, and reflect upon your assessment. So it's the reflection. It's a higher order thinking skill. And section number 5 asks you to give 2 scenarios, or what I call illustrative examples, of putting all that story together. I call it the meta-narrative because as a teacher, you will, and as a prac student, you will collect data week 1, you'll analyse it, and you'll plan a sequence of work for the remaining 4 weeks. And you'll teach that. And then you'll assess along the way and at the end of the outcome. In your report, which I described as an analytical report, it is not a recount. This is what I did, this is what I did, this is what I did. It actually is instead, this is what I did, this is why I did it, and this is what happened. And so you applied analysis along the way. And as we go through the GTPA, you'll see those cognitive verbs that therefore, in light of, gave me insight on, in response to, all those things will be part of the language that you will use when you write your report. As I said, it's 5,000 words. You'll have embedments along the way and annotations. It will be in the order of 50, 60 or 70 pages long. So we really have to prepare ourselves and understand what is this meta-narrative that we are talking about? How does it relate to the teaching cycle? How does it relate to differentiated teaching practice so that you are fully prepared and to be successful? This will be your Bible in terms of your GTPA, and these other things will be the structure of how we communicate our learning. As always, as I go back to the beginning, this is not something to take lightly. This unit is a substantive piece of work. Therefore, I encourage you to be diligent in your attendance, to be questioning and asking and seeking clarification so that when you go on your prac, you are fully prepared and therefore you will be confident to be successful in this unit. So once again, welcome to our course of Teaching for Transformation, Meeting Learner Needs across the MTeach and the BEP program.